drop the case. Well, Judge Sullivan waited about 15 days and decided that he was going to become a party to the case himself and step in front of the full 9-judge panel. And he was going to argue in front of the 9-judge panel that the actions taken were premature. That because the judge had not yet decided either way what he was going to do, that it was premature for the 3-panel judge to rule on a writ of mandamus in that situation. And he did that. Pardon the background noise. He brought the petition in front of the whole panel, all 9 judges, and now they're in the midst of hearing that right now, and it started at 9:30. And to those of you just joining in, pardon for the mistake here. It's WSMN 1590 AM, WSMN 95.3 FM. My social platforms have just joined the party. Hello to Facebook, YouTube, DLive, Periscope, and CloudHub, broadcasting live on all of those platforms right now. We had a little bit of a technical snafu, but here we are. Good stuff. Sorry about that. And so right now I've been listening to this again all morning. All morning I've been listening to first Sidney Powell, who did an absolutely stellar job of arguing her positions in front of the court. And then Wall, who is the Solicitor General, which is unprecedented in and of itself for a Solicitor General to really take this much interest in a case. But at the core of it is a separations of powers issue, which we really need to talk about. And then Beth Wilkinson, who was Judge Sullivan's attorney, came forth. And then after all of them were done, and when I stopped listening, it was Wilkinson still up there. When all of them are done with their arguments, they get a rebuttal period. And then after all that's done, I believe that the panel gets to come back and ask questions again. And so listening to it, I want to stress this. There are a bunch of really interested Americans, very interested Americans, who really want to know what the heck is going on here, are very vested in hearing this case. There are many, many constitutional scholars who have a very vested interest in listening to this case and what's going on. So it's a very, very listened to hearing. The first go round was the same way, and the appeals court broadcast that as well, the 3-judge appeals court. And I cautioned everybody at the time, while I am not a lawyer, I do watch this stuff often. It's kind of one of I was a pre-law student. It was kind of like one of my things. I watch this stuff often. I take great interest in it. And I can tell you from experience, I told everybody, in my opinion, don't freak out about how you feel the judges are acting. I.e., don't freak out if a judge asks a question that comes off in a way as though it appears they are for or against one position. Because they often ask these questions in order to solicit the opposite opinion, a devil's advocate, to get all of the argument in front of them. And just to understand that these district courts are creating precedent that stands the test of time across the entire country. This is not, some little lower court decision or a civil thing. This is a big, wide-ranging, very important case for the precedent that it will set moving forward. So it's super important people keep that in perspective. It's not as easy, although many people don't believe this, it is not as easy to be partisan and politically biased in a situation like this on a 9-judge appellate panel the next step above is the Supreme Court of the United States of America. So in the first hearings, I cautioned against that, and everybody was convinced that these judges would rule against General Flynn, and they didn't. They ruled for General Flynn 2-1. With one of the judges, Henderson, who is still, Wilkins, who is still in this 9-judge panel rehearing the case. Rao and Henderson both ruled in favor of General Flynn and ordered Judge Sullivan to drop the case, as he's required to do under Rule 48. But they're back in front of these judges. Now, I will say it's very clearly adversarial in certain aspects when you're listening to this. I.e., the judges were talking over some people and not others. The attitudes were there for some folks and not others. The hypotheticals that they were advancing were a little bit shady. Last time we had racial hypotheticals being advanced in the middle of the race war that's going on in this country. This time we have nuns robbing banks and bringing over boatloads of money and all kinds of stuff. Just try not to focus so much on that. I haven't heard everything, but you cannot tell all the time. Certainly, I don't think in this case, the way these guys are going to rule based on their questions. It's just, in my experience, hasn't been that way. Again, I'm not an attorney. I don't even play one on television. I'm just giving you my perspective based off of all the things that I've experienced in the research and listening to these cases that I've done for my job. Again, thank you so much for being here. WSMN 1590 AM, WSMN 95.3 FM. So happy. I'm Tracy Beanz. Nice to join with you today. I'm glad you're listening out there in Radio Land. And hello. You can follow me on all different platforms. You can follow me on Twitter at Tracy Beanz. Facebook is UncoverDC. We are on Twitter at UncoverDC. Obviously, UncoverDC.com for all of your news and analysis. So we're just waiting to hear now what's going to go on with Judge Sullivan and what the decision is going to be. I will tell you that Wilkinson's arguments, Beth Wilkinson, the attorney for Judge Sullivan, are very weak. There's nothing she can really argue. I find that she's probably looking at herself saying, what am I going to argue? Inherently, it is the executive branch's decision whether or not to bring charges against the defendant. When the executive branch decides that they want to drop charges against the defendant with prejudice, meaning they can never be brought again, the court does not have the power to decide that they can go ahead with like a kangaroo court type prosecution against a defendant that there's no aggrieved party for. And it's a huge separation of powers and constitutional issue, which is why this has become such a big deal. So that's why we're seeing a lot of the hoopla all over the place right now that we're seeing. So I'll keep my eyes on that, let you guys know. There will not be a decision today. I will tell you from the 2-3 years now, almost 4, that I've spent researching the case of General Flynn, he's an innocent man who didn't do the things he's accused of. Last episode on Thursday, we talked about Sally Yates and how she misrepresented the transcripts in that hearing. Continues to misrepresent the truth. People continue to misrepresent what's actually going on. It's a miscarriage of justice. This case is absolutely abhorrent. Judge Sullivan, obviously, at least, Wall for the DOJ has argued he's at least shown an appearance of bias, if not bias, plain out, and that's clear. I mean, he made himself a party to this case. He made himself a party to it. So think about that for a second. The judge made himself a party to the case. Insane. So that's that. And of course, I'm very much paying attention to all of that that's going on right now. Also, there's a lot of things that happened over the weekend. Frank and I on the podcast, the Dark to Light podcast, we had a conversation about these things yesterday, but I'm going to go through a bunch of them today with you as well. Crazy stuff going on, for sure. Crazy stuff. We had Lindsey Graham come out on Maria Bartiromo's show yesterday. Was yesterday Monday? No. On Sunday. My bad. We had Lindsey Graham come out on Maria Bartiromo's show on Sunday, and he was interviewing with her, talking about how there is a document that they have recently declassified that states that the FBI was giving a briefing to Congress January 14th, 2018, after Christopher Wray took the helm at the FBI. And a little bit of prodding and poking is found that the person that gave this brief to the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, this is the committee run by Warner and Burr, Warner being vice chair, Burr being the chair, as far as I remember. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think so. They're corrupt in and of themselves, and I'll go through that a little bit in a second. But this is the committee who just recently released their final report on Russian interference into the 2016 election, which was basically, in my opinion, a propaganda booklet discussing all of the things that the establishment / powers that be and entrenched bureaucrat nonsense, Democrat, Republican position wanted. So that briefing was, that booklet, that report was based on the briefings and the testimony and all of that stuff that was done by the FBI and all kinds of other witnesses that they interviewed and stuff like that. So in comes McCabe, which some super sleuths on the internet found by doing some footnote comparing dates and things like that. And he briefs the FBI, he briefs the Senate Select Committee, that the primary subsource behind the Steele Dossier, which was the group of memos that were given to the FBI and the press that purported all manner of things about President Trump, his surrogates, that were all now false. We know them to be false. This was the Steele Dossier. The FBI testifies in 2018 that the Steele Dossier, which was derived from one primary subsource of Christopher Steele's, was all solid information, that the briefing would be enlightening, that there'd be tons of things to be learned from it, that it was so important that they had to hide the identity of the primary subsource, and basically lied to the Senate straight up. And from this, I keep saying, they really, really didn't think they were going to get caught. They really didn't think they were going to get caught. It's absolutely insane to me how they never thought, they couldn't have, unless they're that stupid, which again brings up a whole host of other problems that we've talked about in the past. But they really didn't think that they would be found out. They really didn't think anybody would find the documents of their interview with the primary subsource where he says under, to the investigators that, this was rumor and innuendo and, I didn't know he was going to use this in the dossier. And this is a guy, the primary subsource, who was working with Brookings Institution. Brookings. He was working with Fiona Hill, famous impeachment witness. He was working also with Fiona Hill, who was working with Christopher Steele. It's a very, very tangled web they weave, and they're all connected, and it continues to this day. So this Brookings guy was Steele's primary subsource. Again, you're with me on WSMN 1590, WSMN 95.3 FM. I'm Tracy Beanz, and you're listening to UncoverDC with Tracy Beanz. We're talking about the declassified transcript of the briefing that the FBI gave the Senate Select Committee that is full of lies about Christopher Steele's primary subsource. So now the Senate takes this intelligence and uses it in whatever way they find most politically expedient. You think the Senate's innocent? The Senate is worse in a lot of ways than the House is, because they masquerade in the Senate as Republicans. But a lot of them really, really are very bad in the Senate. So Lindsey Graham goes on Maria Bartiromo yesterday, up in arms about all this, completely up in arms about it. And saying, I can't believe this. I can't believe these lies. I can't believe that we were, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence was lied to in this way. And we're going to get to the bottom of it. And I am going to write a letter to Christopher Wray asking him who it was that testified to the Senate about this and lied. A letter. He's going to write a letter. It's a bunch of letters. Some letters are better than other letters, I've found. And this kind of morphs into another really interesting sub-story that we're going to talk about now. It's pretty interesting, and we're going to talk about it right now. So Ron Johnson is a senator, very, very good senator. Great guy. I really like him. I think he's handled himself very well in all the hearings he's done. His hearing with Horowitz at the Judiciary Committee was one of the best I've ever seen. Not Judiciary, I think it's Homeland Security that he's in a chair of. Pardon me for misspeaking. And he did this hearing with Horowitz that was really, we got so much out of it. We finally got Horowitz to admit in his hearing that he couldn't rule out bias, even though Sally Yates champions this whole thing about there was no bias behind anything. Yeah, nonsense. So he put out a letter yesterday. There's some nefarious stuff going on. Excuse me. There's some nefarious stuff going on. Him and Grassley, two of the most honest people in this Russia investigation from the Senate, the entire time, have been targeted by House Republicans and even House Democrats and Senate Democrats. Grassley and Johnson have been targeted by House Democrats and Senate Democrats in regards to the work that they have been doing ongoing now in trying to figure out the corruption in Ukraine. You heard that right. Ukraine, ongoing investigations there, as well as the Spygate scandal, in quotes. And they know they're getting close. You know, we saw those FBI raids on the Privat bank-connected oligarch last week. Very important stuff going on there. This is like the biggest elephant in the room that they want to keep hidden under the table but can't. They really, really want to keep this Ukraine story quiet. And this Ukraine story, outside of just impeachment, which everybody kind of became familiar with Ukraine during that saga, where they tried to weaponize justice against a sitting president again, it weaves into everything. It's going to weave into this story I'm about to tell you. It's going to weave into the Stephen Schrage releases from yesterday, which I'm going to tell you about as well, in case you haven't heard about those. It weaves its way into impeachment. It even weaves its way into opposition research being done by the DNC during the 2016 election by Chalupa. Paul Manafort's connections to the Ukraine. Ukraine is so important in all of this. And look, here we go. Okay, buckle up, because this gets really sordid. And it will continue to be. I found something very interesting. He wrote this letter, Johnson, because he's been consistently slandered in the press for weeks about coming out or about the fact that he and other Republicans supposedly, allegedly, as per some anonymous source somewhere, have taken information tied to the KGB in regards to their Ukraine investigation. We're going to hit a break in about 2 minutes, and I don't want to get too much into this now, but the Democrats are accusing Ron Johnson and Chuck Grassley and others of taking information from Ukrainians tied to the KGB, Russian assets, and it's just not true. And Johnson has corrected this over and over and over and over again, but the press continues to write articles with the incorrect information that the Democrats are leaking to them. It's not true. The CIA even briefed on it and other topics and told the Democrats not what they wanted to hear about election interference and other topics. And it doesn't matter. The Democrats keep asking for further briefings to hopefully get the answer that they want, but they're not getting it. So Ron Johnson finally threw his hands up in the air and said, I need to do something about this. I'm going to write a letter. And it's an 11-page letter. 11 full pages. It is masterful. Guys, I'm telling you right now, you need to read this letter. You can find it on my Twitter account. It's at Tracy Beanz on Twitter. You can find it there. Again, this is Tracy Beanz, UncoverDC with Tracy Beanz, in case you're just tuning in to the sordid drama going on in the Senate and the House inside of our government. We're going to get into some details on this stuff in a second. But if you guys want to find the letter, you can go to Twitter, twitter.com, then look for my at Tracy Beanz with a Z. Scroll down the page a little bit to yesterday's tweets. I have a tendency to tweet a lot. We're about to hit a break, so you'll scroll down the page a little bit. You'll find the letter. I put print screens of it there, and somebody linked the PDF to it in the replies as well. Bombshell letter, 11 pages long. He drops really interesting information in there we'll get to right after the break.
This This is Uncover DC with Tracy Beanz on WSMN, AM 1590 and FM 95.3.
I was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean when it happened. There was a sudden jolt and our submarine crashed on the seafloor. We were in total darkness.
That's Dr. Dejana Figueroa, a marine biologist and STEM teacher, talking about a deep sea dive she'll never forget.
It's funny, when I was a kid, I was afraid of the ocean, and there I was, 2 miles below the surface. But as a scientist, you prepare for that. Using our training and a little creativity, we fixed the sub and finished our experiments. The dive was just too important. Every dive gives us glimpses at things few people ever get to see. Glowing creatures, fiery undersea volcanoes. When we got back to the surface, I kissed the ground and called my mom, of course. But you know what? I wouldn't trade that dive for anything.
Dr. Figueroa uses her passion for STEM to discover new things and make the world a better place. She can STEM, so can you. Check out She Can STEM for more stories and inspiration. A message from the Ad Council.
Hey there, we're back. Thank you guys so much for joining me. WSMN 1590 AM, WSMN 95.3 FM. Streaming live on the internet as well, Periscope, Twitter, Facebook, DLive, CloutHub, clouthub.com. Make sure you go check it out. Awesome social platform, streams video. One of the first to do it well, too. You can find it, you can go to getclouthub.com/beans. And you can find me there. If you're watching right now on these feeds, I'm scrolling through my Twitter trying to find this thread for all of you guys so you can see it. And I found it, so here we are. So back to what we were talking about a second ago, 11-page letter. An 11-page letter from Senator Ron Johnson, Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, where he says some really interesting stuff. They were doing the investigation themselves into Russian interference when Mitch McConnell apparently took this investigation and gave it to the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. Now, I know this can get really boring for some people listening to this kind of mishmash in detail, but I want to explain to you why it's so important that we get this mishmash in detail, and why it's so important that everybody understand all of this stuff. So McConnell, as per Ron Johnson in this 11-page letter, moves this stuff over to the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, just like the HPSC did it, I guess, over there on the House side. I'm not going to assign any real motive to it right now from McConnell. But down the people running the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence were actually talking with, behind the scenes, unbeknownst to anybody, during the very early period of the transition into 2017. John Solomon, amazing reporter from Just the News, reported then some leaked text messages that we got, signal messages between Warner and a guy named Adam Waldman. So Senator Warner, who was vice chair, I believe, of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, is talking to this guy named Adam Waldman. Well, who is Adam Waldman? He's a lobbyist and an attorney. And Adam Waldman is representing, get ready for this, okay? He's representing Julian Assange. He's representing Christopher Steele. And he's representing Oleg Deripaska. Oleg Deripaska, Russian oligarch, involved in the Spygate scandal, McCabe talking to him, etc., so on and so forth. Christopher Steele, we all know who he is. And Julian Assange, of all people, all being represented by Waldman, who's talking to Warner about getting a kind of back channel talk with Christopher Steele about the stuff that's going on. Christopher Steele saying, I want everything on the record. I want everything documented. Warner, Senator Warner is saying, I don't want anything documented. I want to do this under the table. This is at the same time as Waldman is also working with the FBI to try and broker a deal for Assange to provide the information about what really happened with the WikiLeaks DNC emails and the Podesta emails. But the FBI ended up saying, sorry, we don't want that information. We'll let you go ahead and release Vault 7 and screw up the CIA instead. Absolutely insane. So that's the corruption at the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. That's the corruption we're looking at. So while the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence was going through all this information, doing their, quote, investigation into Russian collusion, these two guys, Grassley and Johnson, are kind of sitting back and gathering whatever information they can. But long story short, after all of that, they got possession of information doing their own investigations into Ukraine and Spygate. And this letter here is talking about subpoenas that they're going to be issuing for Christopher Wray to provide all the information in terms of Spygate and Jonathan Weiner from the State Department. Again, you're listening to WSMN 1590, 95.3. Thank you guys for tuning in. It's Tracy Beanz with UncoverDC. So they're issuing subpoenas now, finally. He's issuing subpoenas. But he's also, in this letter, declaring the political, gymnastics that the left is doing right now, and probably some on the right under the table, to be quite honest with everybody out there. I've been saying this the whole entire time. There are swamp creatures on the right, too. Oh, yes, there are. But he's outing everything in this letter. He's talking about all of it, what's going on with the leaking. He's blunt as ever. I'm telling you guys, even out there, if you're in your car right now, just remember Tracy Beanz, TracyBeanz on Twitter. Scroll down, you'll find this letter. It's 11 pages long. Here, he says all kinds of stuff here. Highly unusual, a serious threat to national security when detailed descriptions of President Trump's phone conversations with the Prime Minister of Australia and the President of Mexico were leaked to the press only 2 weeks into his administration. My committee's report on leaks showed that 62 of the 125 leaks in the first 126 days of the Trump administration could affect national security. He even quotes in here, he says, perhaps Senator Chuck Schumer was right when he presciently warned Trump before his inauguration. Quote, you take on the intelligence community, they have 6 ways from Sunday at getting back at you. Senator Grassley and I are currently learning exactly how right Senator Schumer was. I.e., he's saying that he and Grassley are being targeted by the intelligence community in this letter. There is an active campaign ongoing right now against 2 sitting senators he is telling everybody about in this letter, where they're trying to taint them with this information, discredit them, and get them to stop their investigation into the wrongdoing in Ukraine, which is a massive, massive bombshell story. Huge, beyond huge. The amount of corruption and cash cow nonsense going on in Ukraine with all these NGOs and Brookings and Atlantic Council and all their little hoity-toity bureaucratic nonsense. All of that stuff. How many people are going to go down from that? It goes deep with Ukraine. So deep with Ukraine. Really bad news. That's why they tried to impeach the president for talking about figuring it out. But these people are just not bright. I keep on trying to, they can't be bright. The projection is getting so blatant and ridiculous at this point that most Americans are looking around like, what in the ever-loving is going on here? What is going on here? This is crazy. Got to be careful. Podcasting, it's really easy to slip up and slip a bad word in there. Radio, not so much. Socials are used to my little potty mouth I have occasionally. I'm doing all right though. So, Ukraine is a huge scandal, and I'm telling you, they're getting to the bottom of Ukraine, and they're just waiting. Like in this letter, Johnson goes over why it isn't political. Why it is that Biden, and this is like one of the only reasons I can still come up with why Biden's running for president, because he is a cornerstone in this Ukraine scandal. There's no other logical reason why they throw him up there and then put a Susan Rice up there next to him, of all things in the world. Whew. Goodness me, oh my. So, again, read this letter. Make sure you read the letter. Super important letter. It is 11 pages, full pages long, but it is worth every single second. You'll understand, like, it is so, just the fact that a sitting U.S. senator has to write that he is being targeted by his own government for congressional oversight is something else. It's something else. Now, I'm going to tie all this together in a neat little bow in a second here, okay? Back in September of 2017, I did something that I don't ever normally do. I never usually do this. I did a thread. I said, many of you know me well by now, and you know that I wouldn't share what I'm about to share unless I was confident the source could be trusted. And what it basically is a thread of information given to me by a source who will remain anonymous that has pretty much come to pass. It's held the test of time. This was released. I got the information right before impeachment was even really beginning. And I didn't get the clearance or the write-up to post until after it had begun. So some of the more prescient things that had been said previously didn't have as much weight on them because they were released too late, if that makes sense. So here it is. And in here, it talks about exactly what happened here. The shifting the focus of the rollout. Listen to this. This is what the source tells me. Much of our time was spent discussing Ukraine, specifically the role of the State Department. Names like Newland, Kerry, Clinton, McCain, and others were discussed at length. I was told that the attention and focus is going to start to shift from the DOJ FBI to state. This is because the FBI DOJ side is just about ready to roll in terms of disclosure indictments, but state is a different beast. According to what I was told, quote, the legal pathway to the biggest fish goes through the State Department and starts in Ukraine. According to discussions, Ukraine was going to come into major focus because both sides of the establishment aisle got dirty in Ukraine and left themselves exposed. It's a, quote, pathway to the Clinton machine, the Soros machine, the neocon machine, the neoliberal machine, not to mention organized crime in both Russia and the United States. And this is exactly precisely what's coming to pass right now. Again, you're listening to WSMN 1590 AM, 95.3 FM. I am Tracy Beanz, your host with UncoverDC. So, Ron Johnson's letter, this thread that I wrote here, and then something else that has ties to Ukraine that a lot of folks aren't tidying up yet. A gentleman by the name of Steven Schrage. Steven Schrage also was on Maria Bartiromo's show yesterday, and he also released a piece on Matt Taibbi's website. People freaked out when this piece came out. In summary, because it's very long, Steven Schrage says in his piece that he was the reason why why Carter Page met with General Flynn. I'll get this right. Why Carter Page met with Stefan Halper. My bad. My apologies. So Stefan Halper is a CIA compensated political fixer who goes back in administrations far beyond the time that I've been alive, doing all sorts of political tricks, political games. He's basically an October surprise master, Stefan Halper, who also, Stefan Halper, happens to be getting paid millions of dollars from our government for useless policy papers. That's what he's doing. He gets a contract from the Office of Net Assessment under the Pentagon for $470-something thousand to write a useless policy paper about elephants in the Congo. That's an exaggeration, but that's basically what he was being paid to do. He was getting paid more than the sitting president does to do absolutely nothing. Well, what was he really doing? Open source research, as well as interviews that I've conducted with numerous people involved in this disgusting saga, including Svetlana Lakova, who was completely and ridiculously tarred and feathered by this entire fiasco for no other reason than she was a brilliant historian who found some really amazing information in Russia. It's really the extent of it. So Stefan Halper was just so happened to be working also with the FBI during all of this. And he was also connected to Dearlove and Christopher Steele. And he was the reason why David Kramer thought that General Flynn had an affair with Svetlana Lakova. The whole bribery material that they hoped they'd be able to spin. Stefan Halper was, by all counts and purposes, from the research I've done, and I can't be 100% certain on this, so of course the disclaimers coming out on it, was laundering information into the CIA to try and get it into the dossier. Stefan Halper set up Carter Page. Stefan Halper had recorded conversations with George Papadopoulos. Stefan Halper has floated under the radar for nearly this entire saga. Nobody wants to talk about him except Svetlana, Devin Nunes, Lee Smith, and a couple of other folks. And myself, obviously, talked about him at length. Stefan Halper was Stephen Schlage's professor at Cambridge. Now, Stephen is not no little slouch. He was working with Colin Powell. He was in the G8. He's a Council on Foreign Relations board member. He was at CSIS. He did all kinds of things. This guy was no like low-level, ordinary, everyday citizen, just happened to be pursuing his doctorate at Cambridge University during this time. A couple interesting things about this. Stephen organized a conference where Carter Page went on behalf of the Trump campaign, or as a surrogate to the Trump campaign, I should say, to give the Trump campaign's view of foreign policy in the world, right? Supposedly, as per Stephen Schlage, who has just come out of the closet after 3-4 years of keeping all this stuff quiet, he had no idea that, Stefan Halper had no idea who Carter Page was. He had no idea that Stefan Halper was some big covert spy. He had no idea that Dearlove was involved. He had no idea about any of that. He just happened to be setting up this little innocent little conference called the Race to Change the World, how the U.S. presidential campaign can reshape global politics and foreign policy. And then he inadvertently stumbled into a way to introduce Carter Page to Stefan Halper at this meeting, or at this conference. A bunch of weird things. The people headlining this conference, July 11th and 12th of 2016, were Madeleine Albright and Vin Weber. You guys might not know who Vin Weber is. I'm about to give you some information on Vin Weber in a second. But this is the Clintons' acolyte here, Madeleine Albright. So Schlage comes out and he says, I had no idea that this was going to happen. I couldn't believe it when I discovered it myself, that all of these people were conspiring to target a sitting president in a presidential campaign. I was completely dumbfounded. I knew it and I realized it in 2018. Excuse me? Really? He props up Dearlove on the flyer for his seminar, while simultaneously in his article bad-mouthing him. I'm not going to be able to get into the nitty-gritty of his article today, but I can definitely cover some of the bigger points. This is something else. It really is. So he holds this conference in July at Cambridge, a college. The way things work there, from what I understand, is that this is completely outside of the norm. They would only usually carry these things when school was in session. This is in July. So they get everybody over there. Just so happens to be the same month that they launched the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, target the Trump campaign. They get everybody over there. Carter Page meets Stefan Halper. Stefan Halper, apparently at around this time or a little bit after, is recorded by Stephen Schlage talking about how it's the 10th, I believe, the conversation that was recorded. He releases this recorded conversation where Schlage is talking to Stefan Halper about how he can work at the NSC. And Stefan Halper says, oh no, this was 2017, my bad, January 10th, 2017, this call. Right before the leak where we find out about the Flynn transcripts, the Kislyak calls, this is when this conversation with Halper is occurring between Stephen Schlage and Stefan Halper. They're talking, And Halper, he somehow has a crystal ball to know that General Flynn's not going to last very long at where he is, because he has powerful enemies who want to get rid of him in his position. Somehow Stefan Halper just happens to know that. The same Stefan Halper who apparently gave Christopher Steele the information about Svetlana Lakova, the historian, brilliant woman from Cambridge, allegedly and completely ridiculously sleeping with General Michael Flynn after a dinner that they attended. Complete nonsense. Complete hogwash. Complete lie. Her husband picked her up from the dinner. There's a whole sordid story. If you guys are interested, you can go to my YouTube channel and you can hear the interviews we've done with Svetlana about this. You can also go to Dark to Light, the podcast, in Apple or Google or Spotify or iHeartRadio or any of those platforms, TuneIn, Stitcher, and you can, or UncoverDC.com even, and you can find the archive of I've given 3 interviews with Svetlana Lakova because she's so important in the story. They're each about an hour long. One's an hour and a half long. Get yourself a cup of coffee. Sit down and listen to this woman's story. She's got a book out, Spygate Exposed. Her publisher dropped her because the book was about Halper. And Halper, I have to assume, was threatening to sue. But Stephen Schrage here can come out and say all manner of horrible things about Stefan Halper. Nothing seems to happen to him. He seems to be just fine. So why was Stephen Schrage asking about working at the NSC in the first place? And why was he recording his conversation with Stefan Halper? And now the linchpin of all of this in some sort of a way is that, and again, you're listening to WSMN 1590 AM, 95.3 FM. I'm Tracy Beanz, and you're listening to Uncover DC with Tracy Beanz. The linchpin to this is he goes on Maria Bartiromo's show, and he talks in his article about how he was really tired of the wheels of justice taking so long, and that he provided this information to Durham, but we can't watch this sort of a thing happen again, and it's not right. And with the General Flynn hearing that's coming up on Tuesday, I felt it prudent that I needed to speak out. Stop the boat for a second. You could have saved everybody and their mother a whole lot of problems if you would have spoke out about this in 2017 when General Flynn was fired and said, hey, over here, by the way, just to let you know, I had forewarning of this from this guy, Stefan Halper. You may want to look into that. It's absolutely ridiculous. He could have saved not only that, but the hearing today, as we talked about in the beginning of the show at the top of the hour, had nothing to do. It has nothing to do with his case anymore. It's not, like they're through that now. They're arguing whether or not whether or not the judge has the right to prosecute someone when the Department of Justice doesn't want to. That's where we're at in the General Flynn case. He would have been sentenced already if Sidney Powell didn't take over. That excuse is absolute nonsense, and Stephen Schrage must think that we're all idiots. We're not Stephen Schrage. We see right through this nonsense. Myself included, especially myself. So, Vin Weber, real quick, before the show ends in about 7 minutes. Vin Weber is, and maybe it's Weber, I don't know. He's a former Republican Party strategist and lobbyist who worked with Paul Manafort on Ukraine issues. I can't. Guess who else? John McCain. Does the name David Kramer ring a bell to anybody out there? You can't make this up. If somebody were to have written this, it wouldn't sell. People would think it was too unbelievable. If somebody would have written this as a story, it would be too unbelievable to sell. Too unbelievable to even sell to people. Vin Weber resigns from lobbying firm after scrutiny over Ukraine work from Manafort. Vin Weber, a former Republican congressman who went on to become a prominent lobbyist. Oh, surprise, surprise. This is how China gets people too. Their entire shtick is to grab people after they've left Congress, use their influence and buy it off to try and make them influential as far as the CCP goes. That's what this is all about. He and Paul Manafort and Tony Podesta all worked on this stuff. Vin and Tony, they seem to have gotten off scot-free. Paul Manafort, who, by the way, was on the campaign when all this was happening, I believe. Not only that, there's always this miscommunication about Konstantin Kilimnik, who was a Russian, in quotes, but he was really a State Department asset. And Paul Manafort was giving Konstantin, apparently, internal polling numbers from Donald Trump. And they were trying to make it out, the special counsel was, like this guy, Paul Manafort, was trying to give information to the Russians about the internal workings of the Donald Trump campaign. No. I believe at this point he was probably trying to give him information they could filter through to the Clinton campaign so that they would know what the President Trump internal polling said. Does that make sense? I know this is a super confusing bit of it. Like it's a lot of information, but it's all very important. And I know, a lot of people are like, I don't care anymore. Where's the indictments? I get it. But Congress is not going to tell you this stuff. The Senate is not going to tell you this stuff. You guys need to know this stuff. You need to understand why this stuff is important. You need to understand the case. There should be absolutely zero reason why me as an everyday citizen or a journalist or an investigative journalist should be able to walk into any given hearing with anybody on the Hill and ask better questions than the people that we elected to represent us can ask. Either because they don't know what they're talking about or because they don't want the real answer. It's one of the two things. And this is where we're at. So I'm working on this story right here. This Vin Weber story. The connections to Ukraine. The connections to Paul Manafort and all of this. And I'm sure there are a gazillion other people that are doing the same thing because there are some absolutely fantastic folks out there doing the work that the legacy media just refuses to do. All they do is lie. That is all they do is lie. They'll never stop lying. Just get used to it until they're obsolete. So just keep your eyes peeled. You can follow the story at UncoverDC.com. There will be coming, I'm going to ask you guys for help. And truly, out there in Radio Land, if you go to UncoverDC.com, you'll see too. There is a support page right now where you can make a donation to keep UncoverDC going. That's great if you do that. If not, it's okay. Because within a couple weeks, I'm rolling out some amazing tiers where you guys can support what we're doing at UncoverDC. Monthly subscription tiers. And I'm counting on you guys because it is not cheap to run. And I can't do it on my own. So thank you guys so much for joining me today. Super, super awesome. Sorry we started a little bit late, but I hope it was beneficial for everybody. Again, you can follow us at UncoverDC.com. You've been listening to WSMN 1590 AM, 95.3 FM. Follow us on Clout Hub. Get Clout Hub /Beanz. Broadcasting video there. YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, DLive, all the platforms, all the things. Thank you guys so much for joining me today.
WSMN 1590. WSMN.